So I think we've got 18 images
in gallery view.
to go through.
Hide my video in gallery view.
Yeah.
Hopefully, when I share my screen. So I was going to do it similar to last week, where I bring up the images with the ability to draw on them. If you prefer it that way, or as we've got a little bit more time, would you? What about if I was to do some tweaks in Photoshop to some of the images? I could do that live if you like. If there are things which we think
Is
about.
it just images of lockdown tonight, Darren?
It is. So tonight, lockdown images. Next week is your 2 favourite images from 2019. So the 2 favourite images that you've taken last year, which again keeps the themes completely open. Because some people did say last week, or sorry, 2 weeks ago when we did our very first one, that it's useful sometimes to have open themes so that everyone can take part, because some people haven't been able to get out, and do things. So your 2 favourite images from 2019 next week. And then on Friday of this week, the committee and I will be getting together to try and put together a schedule for the coming couple of months. We can. So, but again, following this same format, on Zoom. So hopefully you'll see an email then with that schedule. And we did also put out an email recently containing 25 themes. So one of the things I committed to do during our very first Zoom meeting was to come up with a list of themes, get them out there early, so that at some point over the next couple of months, if we do a theme evening, you can present images based on those themes that were put together by the Camera Club. So rather than just doing 10, I did 25 based on an A to Z. Didn't do one for X because I couldn't think of anything. So there are 25 themes out there. I think that went out on the email, didn't it?
Yeah.
I don't think I've seen that email.
You haven't?
Yeah, it was on last week's email. It was quite a long one. It had the how to enter the competition, what this week was about, and then it had the themes below.
Yeah.
On Facebook as well.
Yeah, and so what we've done now. So last week worked well as a trial of this system. I think it went okay. But what I did find was I didn't have enough time on Wednesday evening. I was pushed for time to get all the images downloaded and onto the laptop, ready for the 7 o'clock start. So what we did this week was
very loud because it'll loop.
We make the deadline a Tuesday lunchtime for the images to be submitted for tonight's critique. I would look to do that each week if we could by Tuesday lunchtime. Ian then was kind enough to put it all together with the PDF names against the file numbers, shuffled all the files around so that they're in a random order, and put them onto Dropbox by Tuesday evening. So last night I was able to download them, get them all on the laptop, and get it all set up ready for tonight. I think a couple of people missed out. They missed the deadline. And I apologise if that was you on the call and you missed out. But we will obviously try and do those images. If you did miss out, we'll try and do them another day. But yeah, it certainly worked better for me to get those images downloaded and onto the laptop and all set up on Tuesday evening. So if we could do it that way, that would be great. So let me just go to these images folder a minute, because I've got to open it up before I share my screen. See the first one come up as I share the screen. Can you all see that?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So you might still get a square image though, Ian, on the recording.
Yeah, it's just nothing to worry about.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. So, based on the theme of lockdown images, this is our first one.
Wow, how is that?
It looks to
Mullion,
me like
isn't
it might be mullion. Yeah. It's an unusual shot if it is mullion, because normally the shots are taken looking to our right, where you would see the island, and that's often the giveaway for mullion. This one, the photographer's gone down the harbour wall a bit and shooting across the harbour, looking out through that gap at the cliffs opposite. We've got obviously a bright sunny day, some reflection off the water, and we've got a couple of lead-in lines.
Nice.
So if I
Yeah,
just
good.
go up to here, I can. Oops, no, didn't want to click on that. Sorry, come out of that. Sorry, I didn't want to do that. Sorry, sticky mouse clicked on the wrong thing. What I wanted to click on was that. So we've got one lead in through here, and we've also got quite a nice lead in from this corner, bringing our eye into this area, which I'm guessing is the subject, if you like, because every photograph should have a subject. It should be fairly obvious to the viewer what the subject is, and then the elements around the subject would either support it or indeed try to not distract from the subject. So I'm guessing the idea was to look through this gap at this cliff opposite and that sort of landslide that seems to have occurred in the distance there. The slight issue with that is it's falling out of focus back here. There isn't quite enough depth of field from this point on to make that really sharp. You only really see that when you zoom in. So from back here, it doesn't look too bad. We've got a couple of swimmers down here, quite small in the frame. They're maybe distracting a little bit, but they're certainly not big enough, I don't think, to be the subject. So I don't think this is the subject of the image. I really think that the subject is perhaps looking through that gap. But we've got a fairly bright day. It's quite a harsh light. I think the photographer's done well to try and get a good exposure of the shot, because it is difficult on a bright day, especially with reflections on the sea. And you can see some reflections at the bottom, which are being kept to a minimum. So I think maybe depth of field could have been better, or indeed maybe it's handheld, and but it does look slightly soft in the distance. Composition, you can see that the photographer's trying to make the best of these lead-in lines.
Yep.
But I think the composition could have perhaps been tweaked slightly differently to maybe reduce some of the stuff on the left-hand side. There is quite a lot on the left-hand side which isn't really adding to the image very much, and so may have worked better as a either as a portrait crop maybe, or indeed zoomed in a little, perhaps. Yeah, because like I say, you could cut down on some of this foreground. If the subject is that gap, you could maybe cut down on some of the foreground and give the viewer more impact based on the subject being this area here. But we'll ask. So this one belongs to, let me just look in the corner. So this one is Jason's. Would you like to add anything to that, Jace?
It was Mullion Cove. And I didn't actually have a particular focal point in mind on it, because it's one of those days when I was just out wandering.
Right.
And I went down around there, took several hundred photos down there, and Kynance Cove and down at the Lizard all on the same day.
Yeah. So was the subject this gap? Was the idea of looking
Well, I was
through
looking
gap?
at the landslide, because that's a pretty recent landslide, but
Okay. Yeah.
it was,
Because what you quite often find is it looks a fairly wide angle lens, which means that your perspective is already quite wide and everything looks very far away. Everything is way in the distance. So if the subject is the landslide, a more telephoto view would have pushed that landscape more into the viewer's face, if you like. You make the landslide bigger in the frame, which then attracts the viewer's eye more, and you guide them to it using this gap. So maybe a crop or something might have, because if you don't have a zoom lens with you, then with if you've got a lot of resolution, you use the crop tool in post as your zoom, if you like, as your zoom tool. You still get the chance to bring the wall into this bottom corner in the bottom right, to bring the lead through, and then you fill the frame with the subject, perhaps.
Sorry,
Did you use? Go on, Cam.
Darren.
Yep.
But my idea of lockdown was in the confines of your own sort of like space. I never took my camera outside my house until for about 11 weeks.
Yeah. No, that's fine. Absolutely. I mean, people did different things in lockdown. Some people took.
Lockdown was sort of like here, not on
no.
a.
That was only taken the weekend before last.
Yeah. So I guess we're still in lockdown.
Yeah, we are.
Essentially. Yeah.
Are we?
Yeah.
Officially, yeah.
Officially, we are. They're still releasing lockdown slowly, but we're not out of lockdown yet.
No, sorry.
So I think when we set it up, I think I said it was any photograph taken since the 24th of March. I think. But
Did you use a polarizer at all, Jason? Did you?
No, everything's just really crystal clear. The water's out there at the moment.
Yeah, I thought maybe there was a polarizer to take the sheen off because I was immediately drawn to the colour of that sea. I think it's gorgeous.
Yeah, absolutely it is. Yeah, and that's the other thing. If the colour and the clarity of the water is the subject, then you keep that in the foreground. Absolutely. But yeah, you're right. I would have expected more highlights than that, perhaps, on the water. So, but you could come in a little and lose some of these, if you wanted to, like that, and still keep the wall towards the bottom corner like that. It's more of a 50-50 split then, but that would work, and you still get a fair amount of the water and the colour. And it looks like here a polarizer might have worked, because obviously polarizers only work when the sun is, or the light is coming from 90 degrees to the angle of view. It looks like the sun is coming in from, or the light's coming in from camera right, looking at some of the shadows over here, maybe slightly in front, but a polarizer would have worked in this location as well, I think.
Yeah, it was. The sun was coming in from the other side of the pier, the harbour wall.
Yeah, just over here. Yeah. Okay. So let's go on to the next one. Oops. Come off of that. Okay.
Interesting. Yeah,
that is interesting.
So,
yeah, I'm just going to zoom it in a little bit a minute, just so that we look at
all.
So you get to see that one. Because on a white background, some of these are almost blending into white backgrounds. So just have a little look around each of these. So we've got quite an interesting layout to the images. So it's almost a triptych type image, the way it's been put together. You've got these two verticals with the center one. You've got these two horizontals, top and bottom.
Black and white works with it.
Yeah, but interesting series of images based on the same thing of this dandelion. And I think presenting it in black and white really works, because we've got all this texture, which is really shown off well in black and white. Look at the texture in there. And there isn't a lot of colour to this subject anyway, is there? When you see it, sort of in the natural world, you get some green to the stem, but these these heads, these seed heads, are fairly white anyway. So the sort of image lends itself very well to a black and white. Obviously, black and whites also show texture really well, and you see the texture here. Really clever idea of making it wet with these water droplets. That really stands out. But so we've got interesting light, because we can see that to bring out the texture, you really need side lighting, and that looks to be the case here. Or indeed, we've also got a lit background. It perhaps looks like as well. This lit white area at the background is helping these seed heads to really stand out. So we've got some good lighting. We've got good exposure. There's nothing really burnt out here as I go around these. You know, it's a tricky subject, these white heads, but they're all looking really well exposed. We've got good depth of field, shallow depth of field, but isolation of the subjects in the foreground, which is really helping. These have got really good depth of field. When you look at the layers here, there's enough depth of field to see all of these foreground ones. And then the background ones, you can still see what they are. You can still, they're sort of complementing the foreground subject, but they're not completely out of focus. We've got good compositions in them all. Yeah, some really good technique. So I'll zoom back out. I think we've also maybe got two independent triptych type pictures, because you could almost put this one top left with the center one, and this one down the bottom on the right hand side, or you could have, because they've got the water in common, they've got the water droplets, but you've also got this one at the top right could go on the left with the middle subject, and then this one on the right as its supporting picture in the triptych. But I guess the real success to this picture is the fact that each individual picture is a strong picture in its own right. And that really helps, because there's no weak picture amongst any of them. Does one or two of them work better than the others? Maybe a little bit. I mean, this one at the bottom, I think, is really stunning. The texture in those water droplets, you know, it's such a clever idea. Putting those water droplets on and getting them so small like that, those really fine droplets. You know, that is a really, really strong image in its own right. I think in terms of water droplets, I prefer it to this one a little bit. Slightly different image, this one. The water droplets are a bit bigger. There's not as many of them, but still a cracking image. And these two, again, completely different, because they haven't got the water, but there's a softness, a soft quality to them. Really like the post-processing as well, the way these very soft grey tones, these very gentle transitions of grey are represented, and a really strong image in the centre. You know, that one works as well. But yeah, it's an awesome set of images presented in something in a different way. You know, having them overlapping like this, it's quite different. But the overall one being in a square crop. You've got, you know, these rectangles within a square and a circle in the centre. It's unusual, and it's really interesting to look at. So this one belongs to our photographer of the year, Ian.
Yeah, just quickly, because I think we need to move along. But It was taken right at the start of lockdown, because couldn't go anywhere. Wife was working, kids are stuck in the house, so I just grabbed a dandelion out of the garden. The light is all from the back. Okay. So the speed light was thrown at a white foam board, and then it's coming back towards the camera. It was a bit of a happy accident, but I just like the effect.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's really brought out some good texture, some good detail, really interesting images. And then, what gave you the idea of that type of presentation?
It was something I saw on Twitter from another photographer. This idea of taking one subject but sort of putting it together as like a little mini story, if you like.
Yeah, because they're all facing this similar way. I.e., they're all sort of going left to right, which I think works really well as well. Even the centre one is sort of leaning to the right. Yeah, it's really.
Are they actually water droplets, or did somebody sneeze on it?
Yeah, it's got coronavirus on it.
Yeah.
Ian, just a quick one. Did you just use plain water? Because some people are using glycerine.
Yeah,
Well,
no, nothing fancy. Just a spray bottle, garden
Right,
spray
fair.
bottle. Just sprayed on it. Yeah.
Okay,
If
and
you
nothing
use a
in the
bit of
water.
glycerine, it doesn't evaporate as quick. That's all.
Mm.
If you mix it with water.
Did you have glycerine in the water?
No, that was just water.
Just fluoride.
Right. Yeah. Right. Okay.
Anyway, next.
Yeah. Do you think I'm not going to get them in?
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll speed up a little bit. A bird on a branch.
We're on a branch. Lovely. Next.
Yeah. So we saw a few birds last week with the spring images, and this one would have been a really strong one, I think, for last week if it was taken in spring. But
cold.
Really well taken, really, really crisp detail. We've got really good technique to get that eye is sharp, that you can see the texture in the feathers, awesome. Catch light in the eye, that branch. But look at the background. So we've got a background which is muted in color, very out of focus, completely complementing the foreground subject, giving that isolation of the subject. I guess the only thing that makes it not as strong as some of the ones last week is the fact that the beak is closed. Some of the ones we saw last week had the beak open, and it gave a little bit of an extra narrative to the story.
Must be a male.
Especially Chris's one with the what was that fly called, Ian? I can't remember.
St. Mark's fly.
St. Mark's fly, yeah. And you could see the bird about to pounce for the fly. So it just adds a little something which is missing from this one. I like the fact it's looking into the space though, and you can see its attention is taken. Maybe there's a feeder just out of shot, or there's something that's attracting the bird to look into the space, which is really well framed, you know. So the photographer's
looking at a fly.
Yeah, it could well be. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, that's cracking. So this one belongs to James, the new bird photographer expert. Yeah. So in the back garden. What's that mean?
I think he's having audio issues. Yes, it must be a bog shot, I reckon.
Oh, from the toilet tent.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, that's cracking. Okay. So this is your next one. So.
Somebody's got a big garden.
Yeah, right. So would that be apple blossom or something, or cherry blossom? I don't know.
To be fair, I think this is Sue Watts's image, and then she takes a lot on her mobile. Yeah, we can hear you, James.
Oh, good.
She takes a lot on her mobile, and you were allowed to go out for an exercise walk.
Your exercise, yeah, indeed, yeah. You could do your walk, indeed, yeah. I did some on the phone. I visited Logan Woods. I know we were supposed to do that as a field trip anyway, and went for a walk down through there, which was quite nice, but only took the phone. So, yeah, if this was on a phone, then the phone helps with the depth of field. So the fact that there's a small sensor does help with an inherently large depth of field, especially with also a small aperture. And we have a huge amount of depth of field in this shot. You can see it's sharp, front to back, all the way through. We've got good lighting, no harsh highlights. You can see that a lot of this blossom has fallen onto the floor, which really helps, I think, to provide another visual element on the ground, because that's quite a boring sort of tarmac path. And I think having this these leaves or petals on the ground just helps to break that up a little, adds a little bit more to the story. I think that works really well, and to have it on the grass. Good framing, I think, with this path leading your eye through all the way to the background. I did say last week that if you're going to have a leading line, it should really lead somewhere. You want it to bring the viewer in and through the picture, and use it as a way of guiding the viewer's eye around your scene. The tree at the top does a good job of not only providing some colour and some texture and some interest, but it also helps to contain your eye a little and to keep your eye down here towards the path, so that you end up looking at these benches. We've got a 3 here with the benches leading through the shot. So I think compositionally it works really well.
I think it would have been a good shot for last week as well, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it would
that says spring to me, like.
Yeah. We've got good colour. We've got good focus, and depth of field. The focus point. I think with a phone, it's not as critical where you focus, because you get such a large depth of field, but it is sharp front to back. And it's an interesting image that meets the theme. I was also quite interested with that little bit through there. You also get a little glimpse as the path breaks off and goes through into this other little route back here. So it even provides, and there's another path here, it even provides a little bit of interest for the viewer to sort of wonder what's lurking around these other paths. So as an image, there's plenty to look at, but doesn't detract. The more you look at it, the more you notice. So I think that works really well. I can confirm, that is Sue Watts's picture. So yeah, excellent. It just goes to prove that the best camera is the one you have with you at the time, even if that is a phone. So we will move on to the next one. Okay.
I've forgotten what these are.
Well, I was going to take a complete guess and say possibly, would they be forget-me-nots? Maybe. I don't know. You know what I'm.
I was waiting for somebody to say they'd forgotten what they are.
Okay, so predominantly, again, we've got a 3 going on here at the top. The others that are in the scene just sort of complement these top 3. They're facing up, so they're facing the light, but the photographer's done a good job of getting a good exposure with these, because the light looks fairly harsh. We've got some fairly strong shadows down underneath here, and the light looks fairly direct. So trying to get a good exposure. I know they're blue and not white, but still they would burn out really quick. So I think the photographer's done a good job to get a good exposure, and there's lots and lots of detail in there. Yeah, it looks really nice. Good framing of the subject as well. There's a little bit of an angle going on, which again makes it slightly more dynamic, rather than a straight up and down. And we've got a fairly muted background, but we have got some odd sort of highlights going on with the background, which are just a little bit distracting. It almost looks like a little bit of diffraction, or a little bit of sort of a little bit of something on the lens, perhaps. Very out of focus, but they've got quite sharp edges to those shapes, and so as you pull back and look at the background, you do start to notice some of these at the top. Predominantly these ones here are quite stand out.
I wonder if what's happened there is, I mean, it looks like a bit of bokeh to me, but I wonder what's happened is, if the image has been sharpened, or as a very last effort, if you like, the sharpening has actually highlighted the edges of those bits of bokeh and made them stand out much more than they would.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just a theory.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, especially if the sharpening has been applied uniformly across the image.
Yeah,
I thought it looked like dew in the background.
Yeah, if the sharpening is then masked, using the masking tool. If you're sharpening in Camera Raw, there is a masking tool, and you can use that trick with holding down the Alt key to show you the areas that are going to be sharpened and the areas that are not. You could almost completely eliminate that background from being sharpened with a setting of about 60 or 70 on the masking. But we'll ask. So this one belongs to
Mine.
Ken. Yeah.
It's actually a gold, like a gold mottled piece of cardboard behind.
Right.
And those little flowers, I've got no idea what they are, but they're about a millimetre or 2 millimetres across.
Yeah.
Tiny
yeah,
little.
Forget-me-nots. They are tiny.
Done with
Yeah, tiny.
macro lens.
Right. Yeah. So those areas are reflections off that shiny card.
Yeah.
Perhaps? Right.
And the card is all like little hexagonals all around it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So, is it safe to say then that you had a fairly distracting background and you use a piece of card then to try and isolate that, to try and cut all that off, or were you using the card to reflect a bit of light back?
Well, it was just the ground.
Oh, it was just the ground. Okay.
So I just put it behind it to reflect a little bit of light.
Sure.
Oh, yeah.
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 So, one of the things you can do, and I've used before, if you wanted a brownish sort of background like that, is I have used a large A4 envelope before. You know, a buff coloured envelope.
I tried several, and I just liked the gold.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So yeah, the envelope wouldn't reflect much light, but it gives you a uniform sort of colour. But yeah, no, that's yeah, it's good to try things like that with different backgrounds just to see the effect that you get. So okay, no, that's great, Ken. Thank you. Let's try the next one.
Strange.
So a magpie on a.
It's a Rosie Starling.
Sorry. Is it? Oh, okay. I wasn't sure. I was looking at the tail, thinking that tail looks a bit long to me. I wonder if that's a.
There's a few been down west recently, I think.
Oh, okay. So they're quite unusual for this area.
Mm.
Yeah.
They are a rare bird, yes.
Right. Oh, okay.
While you're zoomed in there, though, what I found odd about this one, because obviously I've seen these images, is the grass. The grass looks like it's been cloned in,
or it looks artificial. Yeah.
Sure, it's not all. You're sure it's not all artificial?
Ah, right. So this might be a stuffed bird.
Well, no, they have been down west. I know. Well, it's John Marshall's image. I know he's into his birds. So, but I think
definitely been a few down there.
There's definitely some. Even if you look at the edges of that rock, there's definitely some Photoshop stuff going on. I think maybe to try and tidy the background up or something.
Okay, maybe yeah.
You got fed up with snow and put grass on.
Yeah.
Yes, it's a grass effect. Yeah, because we don't know sort of the angle it was taken, because we don't know what that rock is as such. We don't know if John is much lower shooting up and maybe this is the sky.
Do you think it's sharp on the chest but loses a bit of definition in the face and the eye?
Let's have a look. Yep, so it's definitely starting to break up a little as I zoom in. So it's either quite a crop, maybe. Yeah, because it is starting to break up.
I think it's plastic.
Oh, okay, right. Yeah, we can't ask him; he's not here, unfortunately. But it looks like the light is definitely coming in from camera right, and it's difficult because you've got a black and white subject. You can really only expose for one of them in a single shot, and so it is getting quite burnt out on the right hand side. We've lost the detail of the feathers in there, and again, we don't know if it was a real bird and you've only got a very, very short time to take it. You might not have the opportunity to really lower the exposure, but a lower exposure would have made these blacks more black, which I don't think would have harmed the shot, because it is, you know, they are black, I guess. You know, it's supposed to be black. I know some birds look black, but actually they're a blue, and there looks like a bit of blue in here under on this neck area. But I think I would have rather have saved the highlight and had the darks block up a little, because when you try and make adjustments, it's very hard to get detail back from blown highlights. It's a little bit easier to get some detail back from dark blacks. I always find you're more successful lifting the blacks than you are reducing the whites. So underexposing might be the default position, underexposing a little to save the highlights. But you know, we don't know the circumstances, so I can't really ask him on that. But it's an interesting shot. I'd like to know what the grass was, you know, where that sort of came from. But we'll have to ask him the next time we see him. So I'll move on to the next one. That's quite unusual. So this is how I haven't changed anything from the download of the files from Dropbox. So I'm taking it that this is how the files were presented to Ian, and they were just straight away uploaded. So because as I look at it and I'm looking at this texture, I almost want to flip it 90 degrees anti-clockwise and have this yellow at the bottom. But I'm just going to zoom in a little. So this looks like seaweed against the textured background. But looking at the light is on the right-hand side, which, again, if I was to flip it 90 degrees anti-clockwise, the light would be then on the top, which is normally how you would see it on seaweed, because it would be, you know, on the sand with the light coming down onto it. So it looks like it's suspended, perhaps, in some way. Two pieces of, and this one positioned just so it's coming into, it's suggesting it's going to come into this gap here. So it's certainly a shot that makes you look, makes you think, certainly keeps you guessing as to what it is or what it represents and what the background is. It's quite artistic, quite alternative. We've got, when we look at the aspects of photography, we've got good lighting, good levels of detail and exposure. You can see lots of detail in there. Everything looks sharp. I'm thinking that maybe they've been cut out in some way and placed onto this background. So we've got some good Photoshop skills going on, if that is the case, because it looks really well cut out, and all the gaps have been sorted as well, so you see the background through all of these gaps in the seaweed. Quite abstract, and certainly the colour of the background does complement the foreground subject. But I can't tell what it is. It almost looks like it's got a texture of rock, but not the colour of rock. So it really makes you look, makes you think. This one belongs to...
I'll give you one guess.
Yeah.
It's got to be Bruce.
It is a Bruce
Yay!
special. Yeah. He's not online.
I think a mirror was involved, but
I was wondering.
I can't work it out. Yeah.
No, I was wondering that, because you would think the mirror would be here, somewhere through the middle. So I would have thought the mirror would have been somewhere here. But so that lower one, we could be looking at what's up inside the top one. Maybe. And it's important to remember that if it is a mirror, then the subject is as far into the mirror as it is away from the mirror. So that's why I'm guessing the mirror was somewhere at this point, almost through the middle here. Yeah.
Well, we can't ask him. Next.
No, I know. Yeah, because I also think that the background isn't mirrored. So the background's definitely been put on afterwards, I would say. It doesn't look like we've got a mirror image of the background going on.
I don't know. Knowing Bruce, he wouldn't do anything like that. So it'll be all in camera.
Yeah, I don't know. But yeah, okay. So we'll have to ask him when we see him. Okay. Okay, so I'm just going to zoom in a little, first of all. Okay. So a nice countryside scene with some good foreground interest, and by choosing this angle and having this wild flowers, I'll call them because I don't know what they are, in the foreground, coming across the image into the scene like this, putting them against that road starts to give you some of that layering. It starts to give you some of that 3D effect and stops it looking flat. So you have a different texture here in the foreground to the midground with that road, and a nice lead in from the bottom corner. Again, that lead in line going somewhere, taking your eye through the image, but through these foreground and middle ground subjects. So looking through these wild flowers, these wild plants down the road, adding to that layering effect, you get that perspective of that vanishing point in the distance, some color on the far side, adding some interest as well. So a really well seen shot. And I think you might be walking down this road, but it's always the point of stopping and considering the angle, and then moving to the right in this case, and looking through the subject, and then carefully picking the height at which you take the shot. So just moving up and down a little bit to get a height that puts all these elements in the right place in terms of your composition. Obviously a bright blue sky day. We've got harsh light because you can see how hard edged those shadows are. There isn't any, it's not a cloudy, sky with some blue patches within it, because there is opportunities then for the cloud to mask the sun and to give you a soft lighting and some soft shadows. So the photographers had to choose not only an angle, but something which minimizes that boring sky as well. So you've got foreground, middle ground, background elements to think about, that the layering of how you work those objects in together, but also minimizing the amount of sky in the shot. And so I think this vertical framing does well both for the foreground elements and the background elements. And luckily with the positioning of this tree, helps to cut down the amount of blue as well. So adds a little bit of a framing element, if you like. The only topic for debate is, do you remove the wires? And that's something which some people might do, and some not. It depends whether you want to represent the scene completely as it was on that particular day. But then you also have to go further and say, well, if you remove the wires, do you then remove the pole? There's another one in here. So maybe you don't, and because it might be a little bit tricky in some of these areas to get rid of those. But but that's just a a side debate. It doesn't detract from the picture at all. I just know that some people do prefer to remove wires from a shot like this. But, so this one belongs to Ian. Would you like to add anything to that, Ian?
No, just it was when the restrictions were changed to sort of unlimited exercise, I think.
Oh,
So it was the first time I felt comfortable to take a camera out, but no tripod, just a lens.
Right.
And just walking along the road, and I thought, the verges were looking nice, and
yeah, that's been the thing about lockdown, isn't it? That the verges have been allowed to grow wild. I suppose it's added to the amount of insects around as well, which might help some if they particularly like to take insect pictures. But yeah, I think having that chance to let the verges grow wild has been a nice change, because often they just cut back, strip right back to the hedgerows, aren't they? But yeah, that's good. Okay. Right. So, first thing that hits you is the colour, isn't it? Not only the colour of the sky, but the colour of the dress that the lady in the shot is wearing as well, being very close to the colour of the sky. So there's a complementing element between the foreground and the background by tying in those two colours together. So that may have been by design. That may have been a stroke of luck. We'll as we work through the picture, we'll hopefully come up with the answer to that one. So we've got a moment in time captured here where it looks like this young lady has jumped into this guy's arms. She's put her arms around him, and it's that freezing of that sort of special moment that sort of is being played out here.
Oh, they're in lockdown together.
Yeah, they must be isolating together, I guess, from the same household, I would have thought. Yeah, indeed. So I'm just going to zoom in just a little bit to have a look. So we certainly get to see, it's an unusual pose in a way, that her arms are in a slightly higher than you might expect. If they were down a little bit lower, you would get to see the expression on the guy's face. You can tell he's quite happy. His eyes are almost closed. You can kind of tell there's a smile on his face, and you can see the expression on her face. It's just a shame. I say, if her arms were down a little, you would see a little bit more of his face. And we've got this quite strong shadow coming through the foreground. I'm just wondering if we've got a sky replacement going on. The only reason I say that is we've got quite a good match in the colour of the dress and the colour of the sky. The angle looks pretty good on the shadow when you consider the placement of the sun. Maybe it would be over, maybe it would be over a little bit more, but I'm just noticing there's something going on just here. Whoops, just here when I zoom in. So just at the back of her head. I'm just wondering. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's just her hair. Maybe it's just a little bit wet. I'm not sure, but we'll ask. But you can see it's got emotion. It tells a story. The colours are working quite well. We've got that sort of warmish light on the water, and I just wonder if they are the subject, and I'll go back to an earlier point. If they are the subject, and the subject isn't necessarily the shadow, then you could possibly make it a slightly stronger image by making them bigger in the frame, perhaps. Because the shot is all about them. The other elements around them are supporting the subject. And so if I then slowly zoom out, you'll see that as I zoom, the more I go out, the smaller they get. And they now occupy a lot less of the frame. I like the vertical portrait crop to the image. I think that works because they are, you know, a sort of a portrait shape, if you like. You know, so the framing is echoing the subject. I think just you could make the subject a little bit more prominent, maybe. But we'll ask. So let's go to, let's see the number. This one is Brian.
Yeah, you spotted it. The skies from Perranporth and the beaches at Godreary.
Ah, okay. Right. Okay. But, you know, when you look at the horizon line and everything, it looks really naturally done. You know, it does look, yeah. But was that inspired by the colour of the dress she was wearing?
Yeah, the dress was a lot more yellow than it looks there, but I just sort of adjusted the hue so it matched the sky more or less.
Yeah, absolutely, because it's got a lot of impact when it comes up. Yeah, the colours are really strong.
Looks like she's lit up like a lava lamp.
I did like the way the sun was. I mean, the sun was more or less there, but it wasn't orange.
But it's brought out some wonderful detail in the dress. The shot.
Are they a couple, Brian?
Yes, they are. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they were
now.
at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's halfway down. Is it worth letting people stretch their legs at all if they want to?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, thanks for the reminder. Yeah, so we've done an hour and we're exactly halfway in the images. So I told you it would work out all right. If I leave that as it is,
yeah, just say 5 past or something.
We'll just have 5 minutes.
Yeah.
I'm just going to go and top up my water bottle and then we'll be back. Okay. So the next one is this one.
Nice and sharp.
Yeah, right. Yes. And not only is it sharp, but look at the amount of the frame that the subject takes up. So this goes back to my point earlier about giving the viewer no doubt as to what the subject is. You know, often makes a stronger image because the viewer isn't having to guess. You know, yeah, that be. But also, if you remember back to for those of you that saw the spring images from last week, there were 1 or 2 images where the bee was going into the flower and you were just looking at the back end of the bee. They were sharp and they were well exposed and lots of detail, but it doesn't provide as interesting an image as looking at the front of the bee. And this one, yeah, that's an incredible amount of detail. I'm just going to zoom in a little. Yeah, I mean, that's an incredible amount of detail. It's sharp, it's well exposed, it's got a decent depth of field. Look at the detail in those wings. So we've got good technique. You know, you've got a macro lens, I would say, going on with this one. And these things never sit still. So you've got to get your framing, you've got to get your focus, you've got to get your exposure right, all pretty quick. And so that's been done really well in this image. We've got an interesting subject as well in terms of the flower that it's on. There's some interesting colours going on. With I'm guessing a macro lens, we've got a very muted, non-distracting background as well. But the photographer's picked a fantastic angle to take the picture from. The bees composed on the third even as well, so that makes it even more dynamic and a stronger image, as well as the wonderful colour. Yeah, all in all, I think that's been done really well. I'm just moving some elements to one side here a minute so I can see. So yeah, if you're going to be ultra picky, that wing is getting a bit near to the edge, but you know, that's really a minor thing because your eye doesn't go down here that much. I mean, your eye is just captivated by the front of the bee and its interaction with the flower. I think that's incredible. So this one belongs to Ken. Would you like to add anything to that, Ken?
He would be. He's not here.
Oh, has he gone?
Yeah.
Okay, let me just flick back then to see if he's in the waiting room. 1 second.
No, I don't think he was intending on coming back.
Oh, was he not?
No.
That exciting. Okay.
So, next.
Okay, next. So, let me just get my screens sorted out again. Okay. Well, straight away, it's a really interesting looking portrait. I mean, just the difference in the colour with the young girl and the surroundings. The sheer volume of poppies that are in the background, out of focus, and in the foreground, in complete contrast to the very strong look that she has with that very sort of bleached, and I don't mean that in a derogatory term, but that very sort of bleached white hair, the white top, and then that skin tone in between. Just sort of the white top and bottom really frames her face and those skin tones really well. Very sort of piercing eyes as well, looking off camera. She's got an unusual look. I mean, with all the piercings and the tattoo on the side of her cheek there. It looks like a tattoo if I zoom in. What was it? Yeah, that's a tattoo. But wonderfully lit, catchlight in the eyes, looking off camera.
That white hair suits her, doesn't it?
What's that?
The white hair suits her.
Yeah, it does.
Nice.
Yeah, not only the colour, but the cut that she has, the way it's styled, framing her face.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's got an incredibly strong look. And I think the choice of clothing works really well for this shoot. It keeps everything to a minimum. It tones down, if you like, the outfit, so that the outfit just complements the surroundings. It doesn't detract from the surroundings. That low angle of view, taken at or just below eye level, shooting through the foreground poppies, I think really works. The positions of the hands work. Hands can often look awkward in a shot. They really work in this one. I think great depth of field, great lighting, awesome colour, and the right choice of subject to put into that picture. The only one very slight minor distraction, if I may, is her shoe. I take it that's her shoe in the background. The colour doesn't do a lot for complementing the rest of it, if you like. So, it's the only thing that's brown of that sort of tone in the image. And that looks like maybe the heel of her shoe, which is just catching the light. I mean, it is a minor thing. It's such a strong image that your eye is drawn to her eyes anyway. That slight tilt of the head, the slightly sort of pursed lips. It's an incredibly strong picture. Good framing, just that tiny bit of headroom, I think works really well. Yeah, that's cracking. So that one is, you won't be surprised, is a Brian Pierce. Would you like to add anything to that, Brian?
No, not a lot really. It was shot with the 85mm f1.8.
Wide open.
Almost wide open. I think it was on f2.
Right. Did she choose the outfit?
She did, yeah. She knew we were going to go to the poppies, and she asked what to wear, and I just said something light coloured.
Yeah, right.
And she came in that sort of white top.
And she's even chosen a really good necklace as well.
Mm.
Because
I think she wears that most of the time, to be fair.
Ah, okay. Yeah. Because it helps you out a little bit that it's not so shiny and catching the light, but suits her look.
Mm.
It's a very, very strong look that has been it's almost a look that doesn't match the poppies as such. You know, you tend to think of a sort of flowing dress and a very sort of girl next door type look maybe for the poppies, but I think the fact that she has got this more slightly punkish look in the poppies really works. It's that sort of almost as if she's out of place, but really works. And has she done any modelling before, do you know?
She's done a couple before. I think she did one with Dave last week.
Oh, okay.
Is Dave
Yeah.
there? I can't see him.
Just about a month ago, she did a short shoot with me.
Right, yeah. Because she seems to be very natural in front of the camera.
I think she's done a little bit prior to that, but
right.
She's just come back into it after a little break.
Because she looks very relaxed. There's no sort of, you know, tight muscles around the mouth or the cheeks. You know, she's not trying too hard. She's just got a really natural pose in front of the camera.
Yeah, she seemed very, very relaxed.
Just missing the Cadbury's flake.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
right.
now there's a thought. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, awesome. I bet you made the most of it whilst you had the time in the field, didn't you?
Yeah, we did quite a few.
Quite a few, yeah, absolutely. If you've got a model that relaxed and looking that good in front of the camera, you just got to make the most of it, haven't you?
Yeah. It was getting down to that level and getting up again that was a problem.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah. Easier for her than it is for you.
Definitely.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. And that was handheld?
It was handheld, yeah.
And a large softbox?
Yes, yeah.
Just off to camera right?
Yeah. I mean, by getting down low like that and using, well, a relatively long lens, I suppose, 85mm, you can compress the poppies and it makes them look like there's a lot more poppies than there actually were.
Of course, yeah, absolutely.
And
yeah,
it also hides the fact that she was lying in a gap between the poppies.
Ah, okay. Yes, because you get that lens compression. It sort of fills in the gaps for you.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, awesome. Yeah. And a bit of short lighting, so the lighting off to camera right.
Yeah.
And just lighting the short side of the face. But really subtle as well. You would never know a flash has been used, which a lot of the time is the success of using flash. You know, if you get it right, you don't know that the flash has been used. You know?
Yeah, it took a little bit of playing around with the flash to get it right, because I mean, I was having the lens virtually wide open. I was having to use high-speed sync.
Oh, okay.
And
yes.
I think the shutter speed was something like a 4,000th of a second.
Oh, was it? Okay. So quite a bright day.
It was fairly bright.
But you've kept the highlights on the hair down to a minimum. You know, so you can imagine with the hair of that colour, the tricky bit is going to be the amount of light that hair reflects and sort of burning out. But you can see there's loads and loads of detail in the top of her head. So almost as if she had a large diffuser placed above her. But that, I guess, is down to the high-speed sync. You know?
Yeah, there's no sky replacement in that one.
No. no, that's awesome. That's really, that's a fantastic picture. Okay. So, I'm guessing definitely a mirror in this one, or maybe it's in a bowl of water. Yeah, absolutely. If it is in a bowl of water, it's on a very stable surface because you have to let that completely settle to give you that mirrored finish. Yeah, and so maybe it is water looking at this bit here. If I just to draw, so I'm just looking here. That looks like it could be in a thing of water perhaps. But you can see some traditional compositional elements going on here in that the subject, the snail, placed on the third, and to some extent the stone as well. Lots and lots of negative space over to the right, deep black, so completely negative space, allowing the subject a bit of room to breathe. You know, your eye can easily move all the way around the subject. We've got a a good deal of space top and bottom, so the crop hasn't gone too tight either in the camera or in post-production afterwards. You can see the gap at the bottom is pretty similar to the gap on this left-hand side, so it just gives your eye that chance to move all the way around the image in a nice flowing sort of way, so that your eye doesn't get stuck or caught in any of the sort of tight gaps. Exposure has been done really well. I would say it's either a continuous light or a flash, almost directly from above, looking at the shadow of the under the snail there. So the light then falling directly down. You can also see the exposure up here is pretty similar to exposure here. So I'm guessing the light is coming straight down from above, and that is also sort of borne out a little bit by looking at the light on the shell. So top lit, done really well. There's lots of detail in that shell. If we zoom in, we can see we've got some reflections of the light. It almost looked like you can almost see the shape of the light has been reflected in that sort of shiny surface of the shell, that reflecting surface. Maybe that shell is wet, I don't know. But again, if you want to get that sort of glistening effect from that shell and from the rock, you know, using a bit of that water to make it wet would help with that. But an interesting composition. It's something which, you know, I guess if you are in lockdown and you've got some time on your hands, you could set this up indoors. I would use flash myself, because when you use flash, you get two exposures. You've got the ambient exposure and you've got the flash exposure. If you want a completely black background or completely black surrounding, you pick an aperture and shutter speed combination that gives you a completely black shot before you turn your flash on. Then you know that any light in the scene, if you are putting the flash from above, any light in that scene is coming from the flash, and you can then tweak where it sits, you know, the position of it. You can then try and flag it, you know, in some way if it's coming into the lens or is giving a reflection off of something else. So personally, although you've got two exposures to worry about, I find using flash a lot easier than using a continuous LED type light for this type of shot. But this one, let me just see, this one belongs to, this is another Bruce production. So unfortunately we can't ask Bruce unless he's come online. No, I haven't seen him in the waiting room. So it's a Bruce production. We'll have to ask him the next time we see him. But certainly the way it's been lit brings out a lot of texture in the rock. Yeah, that's done really well. And it's a fairly simple composition, you know, the snail on that rock, but quite an impact, because you've got black and white elements in the rock, and then just a completely black surrounding, and then the shell is the only thing of any different color in the scene. So your eye is drawn to the shell because it's on the third, so it's on that sort of power point that your eye is drawn to, but also because it's the only thing of that color in the shot. Yeah, so unusual, but yeah, quite interesting to look at. Would anybody else like to comment on that one? No? Okay, well, let's go on to the next one. Okay, so...
A knitted bear.
Yeah, indeed. A knitted bear on bark. So we've got, and against a piece of wood. So we've got multiple textures going on of similar tones with the browns, but we've got that knitted texture against the lines of the grain of the wood, and then the quite chaotic sort of pattern of the bark below it. So I guess this shot is all about texture. It's what's, although the bear is the main subject, I think the photographers tried to include elements that sort of both are in harmony with, but also contrast with, in terms of the texture, the bear itself. So yeah, it's quite an interesting setup. If I'm not sure about something, it's the black line coming out of the bear's head. I wonder if the bear, if it was placed maybe against one of these panels, it might work a little bit better. Perhaps I was just seeing what would happen if I zoomed right in and cropped it close to the bear, but obviously to get his ear, and you're still going to see a little bit of that black line. But we've got good exposure. We've got lots of detail, interesting framing. Again, a lot of the shots like we've seen in this sort of portrait orientation, and I think that works with this shot really well, because again, we've got an upright subject. And I quite like the way the photographer has posed the bear in terms of turning the body slightly. We've got an arm back and an arm forwards. The legs are turned slightly, so you can see the photographer trying to work in some dynamic angles here, and not just have the bear all on one plane facing the camera. The bear is almost slightly facing off camera. So you can see some thought has gone into it, and some composition elements have been worked in. It's just that one little bit of the background I'm not sure about there with that vertical. But this one belongs to Dave.
Yeah, it's mine. Done in the back garden during lockdown. My wife came out of hospital about 2 days before lockdown, so basically we weren't allowed out unless it was purely just for food shopping. And she knitted the bear. She's knitted quite a few during lockdown, so
awesome! Right.
She wanted a couple of pictures.
Yeah. When it came up, I did wonder if that black line was a post holding up the bear.
No, it's the fence at the back. It's the gap between two fence panels.
Ah, right. Okay. Yeah. No, that's but yeah, I like that. That's good. Yeah, awesome. I do like that bit of breathing space around it. And I think, so if this was a product, say this was a product shot in terms of, you were going to sell these, this was going to be an advert or something like that, then I think you need that bit of space around it a little bit. It does occupy most of the frame. I just wonder
maybe just move the bear to the left slightly.
Yeah, either to the left or the right. Yeah. So if those fence panels are quite wide, you do have the opportunity then to almost have a think of a studio type background. You've got a wall then to put the bear against without any verticals coming into the shot. But yeah, that's really good. Okay, so we'll go on to the next one. Oops, sorry, let me just click that again and click that one. Okay. I'm just going to go out of shot for a second. I'm just going to turn the light on here. It's suddenly got quite dark here at the moment. A second. It's a little bit better. Hopefully you'll see me a bit better now. It's suddenly got dark outside. So, okay, so poppy field taken with a wide angle lens. We've got unusual in the fact that, using a wide angle lens on a landscape, but in portrait orientation. I think it's a different way of doing it. Quite often you'll see a wide angle lens used in a landscape like this if there's something tall in the scene and you want to then include all of the subject, or if you had something in the foreground that you wanted to include and something that was near the top of the frame in the background that you also wanted to get in the scene. But here, it's been used to an interesting effect. We've got certainly quite a dense amount of poppies in this field. So going back to Brian's shot earlier, he used that telephoto lens to sort of fill in the gaps. There doesn't look to be many gaps here anyway in this shot. So we've got a lot of poppies, which adds an interesting element to the scene. And then in the distance, we've got some sort of path running down through here, which does divide the image a little bit between foreground and background. And then you know, just a snippet of the sea again on a dynamic angle, which I think works quite well. A little bit of land in the background, and a horizon line that's not only straight but doesn't interact with the top of this land. So that adds to the layering effect. I think that gives some good visual depth to the image. I think that works really well. The sky, although interesting, is quite light and kept to a minimum because the subject, I think, obviously in this case, is the poppy field. I just wonder if the photographer had got slightly lower and then could have hidden this white line in the poppies, so you don't see this, because it goes from side to side. It does kind of have the effect of splitting the image into two. My eye is quite drawn to it, and I wonder if a slightly lower angle would have obscured that line completely. Maybe. But let's zoom in. So let's just have a little. So nice and sharp all the way front to back, and certainly the foreground element almost has a painted feel to it. It's been rendered really, really nice by the lens that's been used, and some careful post-processing. I think it looks really good, and I think there's maybe even a crop like that which would work as well. You know, there's a landscape crop within the portrait orientation. You know, there's almost two images in there, which I think works really well as well. So this one belongs to, so let's have a look at the number. So this is a John Marshall image, this one. The reason I chose that slight crop also is the poppies are a little thinner in the foreground, although you do have this interesting mix of the red and the yellow. They are more dense just back here, which if you zoom into that, you do make more of those then, and you still get to see some of those yellow ones. But I think that sort of crop works quite well as well. But I wonder what would have happened. I guess if you did take it from a lower angle, the risk that you have then is that you don't have the separation between the foreground and the background. You might lose that bit of sea and that bit of beach. As soon as you lose that, you effectively join this landmass in the background to the foreground, giving your shot less depth. As soon as those start to interact, your shot loses some of that depth. So that path might be the compromise to keep that separation between those two elements in the background and the foreground. But we can't ask John, unfortunately. But so I'll go on to the next one. So I won't guess at the flower because I have no idea on that one.
Oh, garlic, I think.
No, it's three-cornered leek.
Oh, there you go.
Okay. Wonderful amount of detail.
Yeah, Claire's just like, yeah.
So very, very shallow depth of field. You can see the stem. Oh, John Marshall. Just coming in. Just clicking the waiting room a minute. Oh, sorry, I've got a pop-up come up now. I just need to get rid of. Hi, John.
Oh, yeah.
You all right?
Yeah, it's been a little bit late tonight, but managed to get sorted.
I just critiqued one of yours, actually. The poppy field. It is being recorded, so it will be up on YouTube at some point.
Okay.
So wonderful detail, shallow depth of field. So you can see the stem is out of focus, and we've got a wonderful choice of background. So we don't know at the minute, without asking the photographer, where the shot was taken. I'm wondering whether that's against the sky, or looking at the angle, whether that's a piece of card in the background to give that blue effect. But that blue, sorry?
Yeah.
Bit of card.
Bit of card,
Yeah,
okay.
there's a grey band across the top of it.
Well, I was just wondering if that was just a graduated filter. I wasn't sure, but the fact that the choice of the color of the card, that blue primary color, really does help
Hands out.
contrast against the yellow primary color. I think that just works really well, that blue piece of card. I like the lighting on the card as well, the fact it's brighter at the bottom. I don't know whether lighting was applied to the card in the background as well as the foreground. Was it taken inside or outside, James?
I was outside.
Outside, okay. Yeah. So that's natural light.
Yes.
Right. Yeah, awesome. On a tripod.
Yeah.
Because it's incredibly sharp, but really good angle. Looking into that sort of trumpet shape of that flower, I think really works.
I had to get rather low, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I bet you did. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but good cropping. I like that. Again, we've seen a lot of these portrait orientated shots tonight, and yeah, another shot that works with that framing. Again, look at the subject and look at the amount of space that it occupies in the frame. So not too much room around it, a little bit of room for your eye to navigate around. But again, filling the frame really adds that impact. It really adds a lot of impact for the viewer. Careful consideration of the depth of field. I don't know whether you took a range of shots at different apertures, or whether you just chose an aperture, James, and just stuck with it. But I do like the depth of field. It's not too shallow. The risk sometimes is to go too shallow with your depth of field when doing close-up type work. And it can sort of limit the amount of the amount of your subjects in focus. But I think here the depth of field, the balance has been struck really well. So good technique, good exposure. Those would burn out pretty quick. Did you have to use any flagging of the light at the top or anything to just give you some open shade?
No, it was in open shade anyway.
I was in open shade. Okay, yeah. So that helps with the exposure, certainly of white subjects. But yeah, a fairly simple composition, but done really well. A really high impact image. We can see that there is some sort of open shade because the soft shadow on the stem just at the top here. So we've got a really good quality of light here. So yeah, that works really well. Okay. Would you like to add anything to that, James?
I think you said it all.
Okay, thank you. So this is our next one.
Interesting.
Where? No, okay, so a couple of heavy-duty pieces of farm machinery.
Probably Downton Agnes.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, we'll ask. We'll have to find out from the photographer in a minute. I think of, but an interesting.
Probably from Teagles.
An interesting use of colour. So we've got complementary colours going on with the red set against the green, which adds a lot of impact. And we know red draws us in anyway. It's a very impactful colour. Taken in harsh light, but again, the photographer's done well to keep that anything sort of bright highlights to a minimum.
All right.
I'm not entirely sure about the foreground, as in I think there's possibly a little bit too much foreground, maybe.
Yeah, I was thinking that.
Yeah, because the subject is right through the middle. So again, it goes back
almost
to, I know
suit like a letterboxing crop, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it would, absolutely. So at the sort of risk of repeating myself, I know that I've talked a lot about subject tonight as a bit of a theme, but if the farm machinery is the subject, then you need to maybe find a way of showing that to the viewer without distraction. So as Ian said, you could maybe in this shot do a letterbox crop and maybe crop it somewhere around here and here. That way you're giving some of the surroundings. You are suggesting that it's outside. You've got some mud in the foreground, which may or may not, been created by this object. You've got some garden and some countryside in the background, a little bit of sky. And I think then you would end up although I can't give you that view exactly with the zoom tool. But if we just use one of,
I think you've got a crop tool there, haven't you, Darren?
Oh, have I? Okay.
Yeah, fifth button along after,
yeah.
after the magnifier. Yeah.
All right. Yep. So can I drag top and bottom? Sorry, just tweaking the mouse. Yeah, there we go. So maybe
I think that the sky is quite interesting, though, isn't it? I mean,
it is.
I think you can afford to keep the machinery on the bottom third, yeah, like that,
Yeah,
and keep some of the sky.
Yeah. So you'll see there when I click, I get the thirds come up, so I can put the top of the machinery, the red, because again, it's the red that attracts the eye. So rather than that third line being on the black sort of blades, make them right across the red there. And you can see now your eye is pulled straight to the machinery, with the rest supporting it, the supporting elements of the frame. And so after your eyes sort of settling on that for a few seconds, when I then go back to that, you can see they start to get a little bit lost. There's a little bit too much down here, which doesn't really add to the image. So if it doesn't add, take it away, and you could do that in the crop. But I think technique has been done pretty well. Keeping highlights and distractions to a minimum in terms of exposure and technique. Getting good color out of the shot. Certainly the greens and everything look to be correct. They're all those greens are all falling into the right shades of green. So we haven't got an over or underexposed shot. There's some good technique there. I think it's just the cropping. Obviously, you can't easily do that sort of crop in camera, but I think doing that crop in Photoshop afterwards would really lift the image a little bit more. So this one belongs to Jason. Would you like to add anything to that, Chase?
Yeah, it was taken first couple of weeks of lockdown.
All right. Yeah.
I didn't know how long we was going to be in lockdown for, so I just took the cameras to work.
Oh, okay.
I shot stuff inside the factory during the day, and then in the evening when I finished, walked around the junkyard around the back.
Oh, okay.
Looking for stuff for the agriculture competition in, I don't know, August or September, whenever it is.
Yeah.
And just one of the shots I took for that.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah, because I think certainly you've got these interesting little snippets of views through here as well. And I think when you crop it in that letterbox crop, they become a little bit larger. And so you end up seeing a little bit more of the detail, if you like, within the shot. But yeah, that's okay. So that's a good shot. So this is our next one. So
that can't have been done during lockdown, because it was hot during lockdown.
I see where you're going with that. Okay.
You're just pleased to see me.
Yeah. So another shot of that, the young lady with the very strong look, done in a different way. So we've got different lighting, obviously a different setting, but we've got now in the poppy field shot, you had a more, maybe a slightly warmer hue to the background tones, whereas here we get a slightly cooler view. So obviously a different day, a slightly cooler white balance, if you like. But another really strong shot of this young lady, really sharp eyes, really good lighting. We can now see that the short lighting is off, the light is off to camera left. Really subtly done, really making the most of the portrait. So no harsh highlights again, really good skin tones. Another outfit which I think works for her. It's a good look for her. This time we get to see other tattoos that she's got on this side of her face. Again, that same necklace as well. But I think this other necklace, I think, works quite well. So I think the outfit that she's chosen works well for this shot, and the accessories that she's chosen to go with it. There are a couple of small tweaks that I would make to this shot, and I wouldn't mind making them live if that's okay. Would you mind if I open this in Photoshop? Would that be all right? I think we've got time. It's 8:45. We've got one more shot to go after it. Because let me just see if I can go open with, and if I open it in Photoshop, will you see it? And they're only really small tweaks, but this is so the way this has been shot. So can you see that in Photoshop?
No.
No?
No, we can't see it.
Okay, so let me then stop sharing a second, and let me reshare my screen, and then when I pick that element, can you see it now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so the way it's been composed and shot is something similar to the way I would do it myself. But the only thing I would then, so I tend to shoot slightly wider than I need, and then I crop in slightly afterwards, and that's what I would do to this one. So the way she's posed and presented in that portrait orientation, I just want to. Let me just see if I click on the crop tool. So I just want to center her up slightly. So I don't think that tree in the background on the left adds anything to the portrait. So by coming in slightly and just reducing the head room just a little bit, I would just want to center her up just slightly. Now, we have lost that aspect ratio that we had before. So let me undo that.
She's facing into that space though, isn't she? I didn't really see that as an issue. And
no, sure, absolutely.
I quite like the tree where it is, to be honest.
Well, I think it's almost, to me, it looks like a window frame.
The tree gives it a sort of sense of place, which I think you lose if you crop it out.
Yeah.
Well, it looks like a window frame, but I would. The other thing I would do is try and straighten that edge up, and then that would put her eyes on more of a tilt.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, absolutely. Yep. So we'll do that in a second. Yep. So I would look to just remove the tree myself, and I would then just do a very slight, and it's maybe only half a stop of. I just need to move this panel a second to see. Well, that's 0.7, so it's nearly 3/4 of a stop of graduated at the top and the bottom. And if I come out, so that's where it was, and that's where it is. Just it's just very slight, and that just helps to draw your eye towards her face and towards her eyes. It's just a very slight. It's something I tend to do on most of the portraits that I take. So if I now open that up, and so that's just those small tweaks. If it was my portrait, it's only a different view. So, but yeah, so that's before and after. So let's just go to. So you would, if I do a Control T, Ian. So Control A, 1 second, and Control T. So you would straighten it to go that way.
Yeah, I'll try and make that edge straight, and then just put her eyes more on a tilt. And you could still crop in a little bit.
Yeah, so I can drag in from the ruler. I don't know if you can see that on the left.
Yeah.
I can drag in a line, and I could put it against that tree. And then
it's not a tree; it's a window frame.
Oh, it's a window frame. Sorry.
Yeah.
And then I could keep tweaking that until that is straight like that. And then that would need to apply that. And then you would have to then afterwards you'd have to crop. Let me just go to that tool and move that line out of the way. You'd either have to do a content-aware fill for these white areas, which might well work quite well. I mean, if we take the, if I can find it, the Magic Wand tool, maybe into here, and then do a Shift and F5, will bring up content-aware. We'll see what happens if we fill that in. And then we'll do this one, Shift F5. It's doing a good job, isn't it? There might be some little tweaking to do afterwards, just to, you know, if you do get a slight line like you've got there, you can easily take that out in there. But if I do then a Control D to deselect, yep. So yeah, so that's
Is that one of the mine ruins, Dave?
What's that?
Sorry?
Is that done in one of the mine ruins?
Yeah, Royal Francis.
Oh, okay, yeah. So this is sort of an ivy climbing up this texture of, yeah, sure. Yeah, I was thinking it was tree bark from it, but yeah. So yeah, you could do it that way. In fact, I've missed one at the bottom, but I've got a bar up on the screen, so it's difficult for me to see. There is a slight slither at the bottom, but yeah. So it's a really nice portrait. This one belongs to Dave. Is that right, Dave?
Yeah, it's mine. Yeah. Yeah. As you said, it's a bit cooler in Ryan's because that was a the day before it was nice and sunny, and that day it was total overcast.
Oh, okay.
Cold.
Yep.
So it's a great day. But yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I think I've flown her nipples out. they're quite distracting.
Oh, okay.
I think they're bars of some sort, aren't they?
They look like
yeah. Yeah, but that's awesome. Thank you. I'll just go and save that for a minute. If I close that down, do you see now? Oh, hang on a sec. So I've just got to now go and share the screen and bring up that one. Do you see that again now?
Yeah, we do.
Yep. Okay. So if I now go to the next one. So this is our last one. I'm just going to zoom that in a little bit.
Could be into Hiddy somewhere.
Yeah, I don't know. We've got a fence post here with this top bar of this fence leading us into the squirrel. Some wonderful contrast in texture between these fern leaves and the texture of the squirrel, but it looks like it's been taken really close up as well. So obviously a very tame squirrel, but also tricky lighting in that it looks like this top cover certainly over the squirrel. The photographer is maybe standing in a little bit of a pool of light because the front of this, the top of this fence is a little bit lighter here, but it does look like tricky lighting, but a good exposure, an interesting shot, and this one I think works because of the angle. So getting the phone low at sort of just below eye level of the squirrel gives the viewer a view which isn't the usual. It's an unusual view of the squirrel, filling a lot of the frame as well. It's maybe a little bit muted in colour, but that might be down to the fact that it's taken in the shade. Let me just see, number 18. So this is Sue Watts, so maybe it's a phone shot. It's certainly, I find a lot of phone shots are done in the portrait orientation because it's the natural way you hold the phone. I wonder if it is, but it is nice and sharp. I mean, I think that squirrel's pretty, yeah, that is nice and sharp, isn't it? God, look at the claws on the.
You just tell they are doing
sharp claws.
Yeah, right, absolutely. Yep, wonderful detail.
You zoom it a little bit more, you see a reflection in the eye.
Yeah. Yep.
CV photographer in there.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So I just wonder if, if it is on the phone, I might have just boosted the saturation a little to see how it looks. And that might have just lifted it a little. It just looks like it needs just a touch of dehaze or just a touch of clarity, just something to lift, because you know, it looks like it's in sort of deep shade in there, but incredible to get that close to it, because like I say, if that is a phone, that is really up close, isn't it? So yeah, well done, Sue. That's awesome. So that is the last one. It's 4 minutes to 9. So we'll look to wrap up soon. Let's say next week is your 2 favourite images that you took in 2019. So a completely open
That's going to be a
theme.
struggle.
Oh, okay. What, narrowing it down to that many or finding 2?
Yeah, trying to find
2. Well, we did quite a few outings last year, so you never know. So if those could be with Ian by midday Tuesday next, that would be the 7th, please. Because it is quite a lot of work for Ian, I think, to get them all labelled, numbered, producing the PDF, and all uploaded onto Dropbox. So, and that's a working day for you as well, isn't it, Ian?
Yeah, Tuesday is, yeah.
Yeah.
Is there a Dropbox on Facebook to put it on?
No, just email them to me, Brian.
Okay.
Yeah, and then so that gives a chance then, you see, for Ian to put them into the Dropbox, which is an area then I can go into and then download them from. So it works quite well, and they're full resolution images then. So
I like to randomise them and then you know, not getting 2 people's images and then 2 people's images. It just mixes it up a bit, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but then you've got the overhead of then transferring that all into the document as well. So, no, thank you for doing all of that. It's, you know, a fair bit of administration work that goes on in the background to get to this point where we can then present them and critique them. So, yeah, I know Wednesday is a day off for you, isn't it, Ian? But hopefully going forward, if I get a bit more time on a Wednesday, we can perhaps go back to a Wednesday. But at the minute, I tend to be working late on a Wednesday, so if we can do it on Tuesday, that would be great. So that's just about it, unless anyone's got anything they would like to mention. Would you find it helpful if I went through people one by one, or are you happy to just speak up if you've got something to say? And
got something to say?
Can you just email out that list again, down to the 25 subjects?
Yeah, I've tagged you in on Facebook, Jason, on the post that went up.
Oh, right. I'll have a look later.
Okay. Yeah. So again, that was some of them are groaners. You might go, oh, really? You know, because they're sort of quite obvious. But I wanted to make sure that no members were excluded from taking part in those themes. So regardless of you know, ability or mobility, there was something there hopefully for everybody. So just to try and be fully inclusive going forward. And then the idea was that when we have a weekly theme, you could present 2 images from any of those 25 categories. So you know, it makes it fairly open, but also gives you something to focus on. You know, gives you something to think about and to try and produce an image based on one of those themes. So hopefully that'll do the trick. You know, I didn't want to go too overboard with it, but like I say, in the interests of inclusiveness, then I wanted to make sure there was something for everyone. So hopefully you'll find something there to photograph for the weekly themes. And like I say, on Friday, I'll be having a meeting with the rest of the committee. We'll look to put together a programme, and we'll work in some weekly theme critiques. We may well go back to splitting an evening into 2 different parts, you know, maybe. But we'll see how it goes. We'll have a chat about that on Friday. So for those of you on the committee, I'll see you on Friday. I think you've got the link for that already. I think I've sent that out already to Ian. Yep. And so we'll do a 7 o'clock Friday perhaps, and I'll see what we can come up with. Okay.
Hi, everyone.
Good night.
Yeah.
Good night.
So,
Yeah.
yeah. Stay safe, everyone, and see you next week.